Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I've grown into the person that I am today. And, I have been reading these inspirational quotes on Instagram. Sometimes I share them on my Instagram story. Typically, though, I just screenshot them and I save them for later, something to refer back to if I'm going through a moment or whatever. And typically the ones that I read over here and I talk about, I don't reshare, but last night I saw this one come up and I reshared it, and the more I thought about it, I was like, I kind of want to talk about this out loud. Today in I had therapy today, individual therapy, and today in my therapy session, we were talking a lot about me being bullied when I was growing up in high school, and how, like, in junior high and elementary school and during my foundation years, that I was bullied a lot. And I can remember years ago watching this documentary about shelter dogs and dogs that are rescued. And I can remember this guy rescuing these dogs, and he shows this one dog in this crate, and the dog was like 2 years old and had been born in a crate, lived in a crate with like 5 other dogs pushing this crate and all this kind of stuff. And I'll never forget, the guy said, and I'm not necessarily comparing myself and my experience, obviously, to a rescue dog that's lived in hell its whole life. I mean, I had a lot of joy when I was growing up, too. But at school was never a safe place for me, and school was always really, really scary. And so, when he said this, I was like, it clicked for me, right? It clicked for me to understand, like, rescue dogs and rescue animals and whatever, but it also clicked for me in understanding more about, like, what I had gone through. And what he said was, these dogs were born into fear, and all they've known is fear their entire life, Well, from the first moment that I went to school, like, that was how it was for me. Like, it just was meanness, cruelty, bullying, on and on and on. And it's interesting because I used to kind of, like, when people would say this, when I would talk about being bullied or whatever, people would be like, you're in your late 40s, early 50s. This was a couple years ago when I would talk about it on videos. They're like, why are you not over it yet? And I would kind of, like, get defensive about it, right? And then I would be like, I don't know why I'm not over it yet. Like, I've done so much work on it. I think I've even just recently said, like, I don't know, like, why it still is something that affects me in my life today. And so in talking about it with my past therapist said to me at one point, he said, and I've shared this a lot on here, he said, because for me, the bullying, it wasn't so much, in all honesty and looking back on it, it wasn't so much the being pushed into lockers or having my stuff vandalized or the names that I was called. I've been called those names ever since first grade and kindergarten. I mean, I had always been called those names, so I was used to those names by the time I got to high school. It wasn't so much that. It was the going to school and not knowing when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, or where it was going to happen. Like when you see the picture of like a cat and they're like arched like that because they're like scared. It's like, or like when you go to pet a dog and a dog is like, it goes like that because it doesn't know what you're going to do to it. That's kind of how I walked through life in high school, because I never knew where it was going to happen next. I never knew where it was going to come from next, okay? Well, when you think about, these are foundation. So anyway, my last therapist said, has anybody ever suggested to you that you possibly suffered PTSD, as a post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of being traumatized in going through the bullying when you were growing up? And it wasn't so much about the diagnoses. Like, I'm not big on diagnoses except for helping me understand things. Like, I think that being diagnosed, certain things can help a lot of people. For me, to just add another diagnosis to the list, for me, other than to understand it, like, I don't know that it does me a lot of good. Does that make sense? Like, oh, PTSD, check mark, right? It's more about looking at it and understanding it. But what it did in that moment was, it was literally the first time in a very, very long time in sharing my story, because there were many years that I never shared my story because I was told during that time by teachers, by educators, by administrators, by principals, by deans, just get over it, man up, move on. Like, why are, like, this is, like, are you the one instigating it? I always felt like there was something I was doing, that I was doing something wrong, that I was to blame for what was happening to me, right? And so I lived in that for a long time. And so when he said that to me, it was the first time that I really felt seen. I really felt like somebody saw what I had gone through, And we talked at that time about these were we talk about fundamental foundation years for kids, okay? We talk about growing up and that, you know, a adolescence mile is not fully developed until they're 25 and things like that. We talk about this and that, you know, the foundation years, which, you know, is like up till like, you know, 10 years old, like those foundation years are so important in founding that brain, right? Well, those years for me, I grew up in fear. And so that was what I knew. I reacted to fear. I was reactionary. And to some degree, I've been like that most of my life. Not just by being bullied, but in anything that happens in my life. I'm constantly like an arched cat, right? Like I don't know what's going to happen. I think in some ways, I'm stronger by having gone through it. I think in some ways, you know, this idea of thicker skin versus thinner skin is interesting. And I actually made a video years ago and I said, I don't have thick skin. I just don't. I wish I did. I wish I, you know, wasn't somebody that like everything affected me. I don't know why I'm that way, you know? And the reason why I say I wish I wasn't is because I think personally, me being sensitive to things that happen in my life or me crying over it or me having an emotional response personally has greatly benefited me. I think on the outside looking in and people's perceptions of it and people's responses to it, not just online, I mean years before I ever got online, but just in personal interactions other than like with my husband, past boyfriends, my best friends, sponsors, and my family, other people don't really know how to respond to that. I don't know that it's been really that helpful for me to be that person, you know, in my life. And so I'm not a super thick-skinned person. I just am not, you know? I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm very emotional. And a couple years ago when I realized that through therapy and doing, you know, work with my sponsor and things like that, to lean into it, that's who I am, to lean into it and to embrace it instead of ignoring it and to act like, oh no, I've got thick skin and I've gone through all this stuff and I'm a tough guy, to instead go, no, I'm not a tough guy. And there's a lot of shit out there that I can't handle. There's a lot of stuff that I just don't know what to do with. It's too difficult to deal with. I don't know what to do with it, right? And to lean into that. So when I saw this quote last night online, I was like, I love this. And so it's talking about trauma, right? And, you know, I think everybody's trauma is different. Everybody's traumatic experiences are different. And when you ask me about like trauma that I've experienced in my life, I've suffered multiple different kinds of trauma, right? I mean, everything from the car accident and afterwards with all of that and the guilt and the remorse that I had, not to mention the fear and the police investigation and people's perceptions online and things like that. You know, there was a lot, not to mention, you know, always being worried until I spoke to his mother of what the family thought. And, you know, I didn't know, you know, like, and was I going to have another seizure? I still live with that every single day, you know? And so like, that's the reason why I choose not to drive today. And also in being able to, that's one thing I can do for the family, you know? And so from that all the way to losing my mother at a young age, that was traumatic for me. I mean, she was one of the only, as an only child, she was one of the only people I had in my life, in my corner at that time, you know? And she also passed away when I quit a 13-year position and I went through a major breakup. So it was like this huge transition year for me. That year for me was like a year of growth, but also a year of like severe trauma. And then going through and being bullied all through growing up, you know, like that was traumatic. Not to mention a lot of the experiences that I had while I was actively using. And yes, I chose to put myself in those positions. But that doesn't mean, okay, that doing things, and you know, we kind of dance around these subjects sometimes, so for this experience today, or this talking about this today, I'm not, but you know, doing things sexually so that you get drugs in return with people that you don't want to, or putting yourself in dangerous situations where you have a loaded cocked gun in your mouth, okay, or you wake up places that you have no idea where you're at, in cities that you don't know how you got there. That's a lot of traumatic experiences, and that was an average Tuesday night for me when I was using. It was very, very scary times, you know? And then the bullying, which was basically the foundation of these traumatic experiences for me. And so when I look at all of that, it's like I do on some level acknowledge that I've gone through some stuff in my life. Now, the stuff that I've gone through maybe is no greater, no worse than what other people have gone through. It's just different. You know, all of our stuff is different that we've gone through. So I saw this last night, and I loved this quote, and it said, this is by, the credit is by Sonkie, S-O-N-K-I-I-E, and it says, not everyone's trauma gives them thick skin. Some people's trauma made them more sensitive and insecure. They cry more easily, get overwhelmed at small things. The narrative that trauma makes you stronger is a lie. There is power in acknowledging it and growing from it. And you know what? Let me tell you why I love this quote so much, right? Because I think that people in my personal life that I've talked to, not therapeutically, but other people, you know, when I've talked to them about things I've gone through, like the bullying or whatever, they'll say, but you're stronger now that you've gone through it. Like you're a wiser person. You look at the world in a different way by what you've gone through. And that may be true, right? But I think that a lot of people don't know how to respond to people that have gone through trauma, no matter how small or how large it is. They don't know how to respond to you. They don't know what to say. It's like when somebody passes away in your life, people don't know what to say. They don't know. I mean, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I mean, okay, that seems pretty superficial. You know, people don't know what to say. It's uncomfortable. We're not taught how to say those things. And when people have trauma in their life, whether it's abusive, whether it's loss, whether it's bullying, whatever your trauma is, medical, you know, chronic medical issues are trauma, right? Like no matter what you've gone through in your life, people don't know how to have those conversations. We're not taught to have those uncomfortable conversations. People don't know how to do it, right? So I think that they often, out of kindness and love, they try to say things like, but you're stronger for it. You know, like you're going to grow from this. You're going to become stronger. And then through the years, I've leaned into that and been like, yeah, that's true. Like I'm going to be stronger. When the reality is that narrative, like it says in here, hold on just a second. Let me pull this up. It keeps on going out of the picture. This narrative in here that it says, there is power in acknowledging it and growing from it. Okay. That the narrative that trauma makes you stronger is a lie. It's not necessarily a lie, but it's not always true, you know? The thing is that trauma can make you stronger when you work through it and you deal with it. But by acting like what I went through, because I went through it, made me stronger, that's the lie, right? Like just by having gone through it, I'm stronger. I don't believe that. You know, in all honesty, I have known some people in my life that have gone through some horrific crap, traumatic experiences, that have not dealt with it in very healthy means and have hurt themselves and, you know, continue to. And it scares me for them. And so that doesn't necessarily, just because you've lived through a traumatic experience, it doesn't necessarily mean it makes you stronger. It's what you do. It's the change in the growth, like this quote is saying. It's the change in the growth that you go through. And it's acknowledging that. It's acknowledging that I went through this thing, right? I went through this period in my life. I went through this horrible time that was hard for me. Maybe not just for me, but maybe for other people involved in it as well. But for me, I have a response to that. And I have to acknowledge that I was scared and I was afraid no matter what the experience was, and I didn't know what was coming next. And I carry all of that fear into my life today, that being unsure of what's coming next, you know? And I'm talking about fear so terrifying you don't even want to move. Like I've felt that way in my life before, and it all goes back to what I went through in first grade. So when people tell me, just move on, just get through it or whatever, why are you still talking about this at 52 years old? Because it still affects me today. To the point where my therapist today is like, we're going to do a trauma narrative over being bullied. Because you need to acknowledge this and move through it. So it's not about just ignoring it and acting like I'm a stronger person. I wish I could sit here and tell you today I am a stronger person by going through what I went through. I hope I am someday. But I have to acknowledge what I went through first. I have to feel my feelings and be really honest about them. And really true to myself, and share that with at least one other human being that understands what they're talking about to help me process that stuff. No matter what the traumatic experience is, you know? When I did the trauma narrative over the accident, there were things that I didn't even know that I felt a certain way about, things that weren't even related to the accident that I was acting today. Like, I didn't even know, you know? And then I'm also working on OCD and getting rid of all those things. And, you know, it's like this fear and this anxiety and this lack of control over stuff comes out. And then it's like it all goes back to how I felt in first grade of having a teacher that didn't protect me and kids that were trying to like take me down. And that's how it felt. So when those feelings come up today, yeah, it is very, very scary. It is trauma. It is, you know, trauma related. I think I don't want to live constantly as a victim of having gone through those, you know, the bullying. I don't want to constantly be a victim of going through the bullying, but I think that I have to acknowledge it. My opinion's changed on this in the last couple years, you know? I don't think about it all the time. I really don't. Like unless I'm in a therapy session or whatever, but there are things that happen in my life that I look at and I process or I write down or I talk to my therapist or my sponsor about that directly goes right back to how I felt when I was in first grade. So it's not about constantly thinking about it or always being a victim of it. I don't want to be a victim of anything at all. I don't think it helps me to victimize myself or be a victim. I want to learn from it. I want to grow and be on the other side. But to do that, I can't just say, by having gone through this experience, I'm stronger. I have to process it. I have to process the real emotional feelings. I think we're afraid to do that. You know, when I say in videos a lot, working through something, whatever, people are like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Well, that means talking about how you really feel unedited about something, you know, and saying that these kids, you know, it's like, I look at my nephews sometimes. My nephews now are like in 3rd grade and 6th grade, and I look at them and I think, they're almost aged out of when it first started with me. And they're so little, you know? And I think that kids that were younger than them, I'm still in my head thinking about, like, all these years later, you know? And when people say, get over it, I respond to the world. It's like when people enter Al-Anon because they grew up with an alcoholic father or mother. They respond to the world by being a child of an alcoholic. Well, I respond to the world by having grown up in fear of being bullied, a fear of where it was coming next. I can't ignore it. I can't continue to act like it, that I've grown through it, and even though I've talked about it and done anti-bullying campaigns and whatever, I can't continue to act like it doesn't affect me. I have to work through it and acknowledge it, you know, and hopefully then on the other side, I will be stronger. But I don't want to stay a victim to this for the rest of my life. I don't want to be 75 years old continuing to talk about this unless I'm talking about it to help somebody. Many times when I bring it up in videos, it's because I want to help somebody that's going through something similar. Because it's not just about being bullied when you're 5 years old. Bullying happens in families, it happens in friend groups, it happens in neighborhoods, it happens in schools, colleges, it happens in workplaces, it happens everywhere. Bullying happens everywhere, you know? So, I don't know, and not just with the bullying, but with all of the situations that I've gone through in my life, I don't know that, like, you just go through something and it weathers you down and your skin is tougher and you're tough skin because of that. I think sometimes what happens is you go through something and you learn to push it down more. And you learn that I can take more because I've gone through this. What do you got next for me? And that seems like tough skin, right? That you don't emotionally respond to things. Well, I did that for years and years and years. I didn't cry over anything. I know it's hard to believe, but I didn't. I didn't cry over anything. I didn't talk about anything. There were 4 years that I didn't go to meetings, and when I came back into meetings, I started talking, and I started crying, and I started getting angry at a God that took my mother, and that didn't even make sense to me, right? But then I started working through it. But for years I pushed it down. People were like, oh, they're strong. He's stronger because he went through this situation. No, I was better at pushing it down and not dealing with it. I don't want to do that today, you know? I have friends of mine that are 70 years old, literally 70 years old, in therapy, friends of mine that are sober, that are in therapy, working on issues from their childhood for the very first time, because they don't want to deal with it anymore. So just assume that there's a time limit or an age limit on working on this stuff. It's not true, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge, man, I went through some shit, right? And I have some feelings and emotions attached to that, rightfully so. And if I want to get angry and if I want to cry and I want to share what's going on, I have to do that. And that's all part of working through it. And then hopefully on the other side, I will be stronger because I have grown as a result of that, but not simply by having gone through it. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.